Andrew and Thomas, thank you so much for joining Scaling Laws.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Kevin. I'm very excited for the podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure as two founders, you have approximately a trillion other things to be doing. So it means a lot that you would take the time to come nerd out with a lowly law professor on an AI policy podcast. So thanks to you and thanks to your team for letting us steal you away for a little bit. So, Andrew, I'm sure everyone's thinking, what the heck is Vesta and why the heck is Andrew on a policy podcast? So let's just start with what is Vesta? What does it do? And why did you start it?
Yeah, so Vesta is a platform for helping event organizers all across the country get more attendees to their events. And, this crosses a variety of industries from, of course, like music venues and comedy clubs and sports teams and folks you would think of first when I say events, but also local museums, local nonprofits, a lot of art galleries, local artists, really anybody that's doing something experiential and trying to get folks off of their couch and into the community. We've built a variety of tools to help them create once on our platform or on their website and then post it everywhere that their event needs to go, from local listings and websites like TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, visitors bureaus, to digital ads, social media, email, because there's just too many channels, as I'm sure, we'll talk about here with AI, and there's too many channels that need to be covered that need to have something created versus the time and ability for them to go through and do that. And the end result of that is a win-win for everyone, where those artists, those venues are able to have more attendees, more public engagement, folks that are in the community. It turns from being just a place that they live into a home and a place that they're really a part of. And then obviously for the community, that brings a whole lot of positive benefits as well for everybody involved.
So, two quick questions to follow up there, Andrew. First, did you just find yourself on the couch too frequently and think, I really need to help myself out? And second, how is AI a feature of this tool?
So for the first part, a little bit of that, but actually is more so the other side of, I felt like there was too many cool things going on, and I was a volunteer with the Omaha Chamber's Young Professionals Council at the time. And the number one question that I would get at those events is, where are all the cool events? Like I'll see it happening, either I don't know that it's happening, or even worse, I'll see it on Instagram or Snapchat after it's happened. So where do I go to find out ahead of time? Where are those cool things to do in Omaha? And the first couple times I thought, maybe that's not that big a deal. Maybe they just, weren't looking hard enough or what have you. But then from really digging into it and then putting on events for the Young Professionals Council as well, just really realized just how broken and hard it was to go out there and actually market and promote events, because most of those channels aren't built, like MailChimp or Buffers, Sprout Social are all fantastic marketing tools, but they're not built for the events industry because it's just kind of a weird, quirky industry with just the way events work at the end of the day.
No one wants FOMO in Omaha. I mean, if
Right.
there's one thing I know, no FOMO in Omaha, right? So
Totally.
great. You're getting this
Yep.
tool to help folks find the events that are happening across Nebraska and around the country and perhaps even around the world. So how is the AI factor in here?
And so the AI is really what's enabled us to build out all of those additional channels. If we started first with just helping with local listings, getting their events into like the Omaha World Herald or Visit Austin or the Denver Post or the Tampa Bay Times or whatever that local, set of publishers and calendars is that had those things to do guides or those community calendars of upcoming events. But now with AI, we're able to take that same content and do all sorts of interesting and fun things with it, turning it into good email content or social media content or press releases, and then also throughout all of those steps, able to do things on our back end to deliver better service for our customers and ultimately deliver better results for them in their marketing campaigns too. So it's kind of it really fits our ethos of we're helping our customers save time by using the AI to generate that net new content, and then also allow them to sell more tickets and ultimately have more attendees because we're able to help them create better marketing campaigns using AI. So it's been transformational for our business.
Well, lots to dive into there. First of all, I need to definitely talk more about the cool things to do in Omaha because I may not have known how many cool things there were, but we'll get to that in a second. Thomas, what is August Law and how is it using AI?
Yeah. So August Law provides a unified workspace for lawyers. It's sort of the next generation legal operating system. It's fully powered by AI, and it can do end-to-end workflows. So if you have a client that emails you a couple of documents, you can use August to understand those documents, to reply to them, to edit Word documents, and to do that full end-to-end legal review process. We use AI everywhere, right? We have been foundational to the legal tech landscape over the past couple of years, right? We have firms in Nebraska using us, we have firms in New York using us, and we are already on 4 different continents at this stage. And so we are sort of at the leading edge of how you use AI in professional services to accomplish actual work that used to be done manually on a computer. And so I think we use top-tier foundation models from all of the frontier labs, and we incorporate them and we give them tools that a lawyer would use, whether that's Word, whether that's Outlook, whether that is just reviewing documents or doing legal research. And then we connect all of the tools up into our agent, and then our agent can run all of those tools simultaneously. So we sort of have this suite and workspace in many different platforms here. And we are already global. So that requires us to integrate with a lot of local jurisdictions, case laws, and all of this other information, and give that to a large language model.
So, Thomas, as a lawyer, forgive me, what would you say is one of the most common use cases of August Law?
Yeah. So we have very common use case on the transactional and litigation side. On the transactional side, drafting an SPA with a term sheet is one of the most common use cases, particularly in M&A. On the litigation side, you can reply to an interrogatory. You can draft a motion to dismiss. You can draft a reply to discovery on our platform, right? And we can do brief writing as well, right? So I think we're sort of at the leading edge of both of these sort of areas there. Hope that makes sense.
Fascinating. So when you're looking for that 7th continent user,
Yeah.
let me know. I will take the ship to Antarctica and
I
be the
love that.
first
That would
August
be
user
that.
there. Just let me know.
It's just on our way. Let's do
There
it.
we go. There we go. We got it. We got to do it. I'm your man. So, Thomas, to stick with you now, how many employees do you have? What jurisdiction are you in? And what sort of revenue roughly are we looking at? And I'm asking because we're doing some good issue spotting here. Before we get into the regulatory weeds, we've got to know some of our core facts here.
Yeah. So we've grown incredibly fast over 2025. So we actually started off the year with 3 founders, just 3 founders, no employees. And we're now at 18 employees right now, right? And so we've seen that tremendous growth. We just launched in India, in Australia, and in Europe, and in the Middle East, right? And we've signed top firms in India, top firms in Australia so far. Those are all public. In terms of revenue numbers, it's changing every day. We started off the year with 0 revenue. So wherever we get this year is definitely very exciting there.
Fantastic. Okay. And I think it's safe to assume we're not talking trillions or hundreds of billions.
We're not talking billions. Yes.
Okay. Andrew, how about yourself? Where's the corporate home and how many employees are we talking about here?
So we're located in Omaha, Nebraska, and have 5 full-time team members, including myself. So I like to say that we're a small but mighty band. And unfortunately, not in the trillions either, but had seen we're up probably it's around 2.5x versus where we ended last year at. So on a very good growth clip versus where we started at, and especially been seeing some good growth of those expanded AI tools, but still, well under $10 million in revenue a year. So we have resources at our disposal, but not an unlimited amount of resources. And hopefully our lawyers are using August so that they can give us a even more affordable quote next time we need legal work.
There we go. I love the synergy already happening. Like good founders, always looking for opportunities. But I ask these questions not to try to put y'all on the spot, but what we've heard frequently from a lot of AI policy advocates and a lot of legislators is a real intention to make sure that little tech or startups or Main Street AI, you pick the nickname, trying to make sure that whatever regulations are being passed aren't inhibiting these small innovators like yourselves. And so I think it's great to get a sense of, hey, we've got a founder here in Nebraska, we've got a founder up in New York that have relatively few employees, all things considered. They're growing. How do we help sustain these awesome efforts and these job creating efforts, which is really exciting to hear. So, Thomas, I'm eager to hear from your from your vantage point. You've got 18 employees. Who's paying attention to policy? Do we have one particular policy person? Is it a kind of all hands on deck Slack thread? Or perhaps is it ChatGPT sending you news alerts every week? How do you try to stay on top of the policy space?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm personally just very fascinated with policy, right? I interned in the Senate in college, right? I worked at a couple of law firms as well. And so I've been paying a lot of attention to this space. I think that in terms of company-wide perspective, I think since we sell to law firms and law firms are constantly talking about AI regulations, data privacy, and security, we have at least a link sent every day in Slack about new policies coming up, new things that we should think about in this space, right? And safety constraints, right? So we are dealing with agents that have a tremendous power at a law firm, right? Tremendous amount of opportunity and tremendous value, right? And so we pay attention to where the sort of frontier of risk lies, right? There. I think that in terms of day-to-day regulations, we are based in New York. We care about regulations that are passing here. A lot of our customers are in foreign countries, and so we have to sort of have our eyes on the ball wherever we are. And that's definitely a big challenge today, right? Considering things are moving incredibly fast. And we want our eyes to be on the product and developing that and on sales as well.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to put this into context where a firm like Meta, for example, has hundreds,
Team
if
of
not
hundreds.
thousands,
Yeah.
of public policy folks, compliance officers, in-house counsel, so on and so forth. And yet, Thomas, I'm going to put some words in your mouth. Generally, it's kind of just an all hands
It's
on
a
deck
hard
effort
Yeah.
of just let's try to stay on top of this, but not necessarily shelling out tons of money for some sort of outside counsel or a policy firm to keep you in the weeds. It's just doing the best we can.
100%.
And so, Andrew, from your vantage point in Omaha, what's your sort of policy framework in terms of staying up to date on the latest laws and proposals?
Yeah, I would say very similar to Thomas of keep our ear to the ground on what's happening out there, staying engaged with groups like Engine, which does a great job on a federal level of advocating for tech startups and talking about what's happening in DC and how that can impact us, and then staying involved with like the Nebraska Tech Collaborative or Tech Nebraska for those ones that are a little bit more closer to home. For us, we're not currently international, so I don't envy what Thomas has to deal with there at all. And our customers are, I would say, a little bit less sophisticated on that. A lot of them are small business owners, or maybe have a few locations, so they're really more in the weeds on what's going on in their business versus paying attention to all the different policies and regulations. So we do our best to stay ahead of that, so we can stay compliant in the 50 different states that we operate across the country, and that nice patchwork, as I'm sure has been talked about on this podcast before.
Once or twice. We consider
Yeah.
ourselves quilters here. We've been confused as a quilting podcast because we reference patchwork so frequently. But Andrew, I'm curious, as an app that doesn't scream AI, when you say I built a event company that helps spread the word about cool stuff going on in your community, people may not say, oh, they must be using AI in a number of domains across a number of sectors. How are regulations already impacting you? And the more specific you can be, the better in terms of what are you thinking about when you are picking what models to use, when you are disclosing to customers to the extent you are disclosing, what laws are already top of mind for you?
Yeah, great question. I would say a few different keys there. I mean, one, just from kind of the chilling effect, or what are the downstream impacts of, at least at this point in time, have zero interest in experimenting with their own models or building out anything besides working with a foundational model and using that, via API, and then building our own secret sauce and our own secret pieces into that, just because as we keep seeing the ballooning impact of regulations across, both on the federal level, where there was obviously some conversation earlier this year about doing something there that didn't come to fruition, but now on a state level that you're starting to see a lot more of these AI laws roll out, or a lot more conversation happening. We just don't have that manpower, right? Literally, if we have the five people, the all hands on deck, and so we need to turn to these massive companies and rely on the infrastructure they built out, that they have those compliance teams and everyone else, which it has good and bad benefits for us as a business. But it's definitely one example where just even the threat of new regulation coming out, and having to stay up with that across 50 states, strategically limits what we're able to go after and achieve at this point in time. And in terms of how we're dealing with some of the more day-to-day impacts of where we're using AI, of labeling that, and giving the user choice is one of the big things, so that they know that they're interacting and that they're using AI, that we're not just taking their content and then transforming it without their permission or without them being involved in that process. And then, since it is marketing, we really have a philosophy of you can use AI to do all of that end to end and push that out. but very much still trying to have a human in the loop in that process and having it as more of that like first draft version for them to make those final tweaks on, and just getting past that blank state problem where instead of sitting there and looking at their marketing calendar of what are all the different things they need to create for the month and then just getting overwhelmed and not even sure where to start, that we just give them something that's, close, hopefully good enough that they can just press publish right then and there, but usually do a little bit of tweaking so it's got the best of both worlds, that they can do that whole month's marketing plan in an hour instead of 10 hours or 10 days like it normally takes them right now manually.
So, is it fair to say, Andrew, that there's a sort of finger crossing scenario going on here where it's let's just hope that our upstream providers of whatever AI tool we're relying on is using all of that compliance work and resources for the best purposes, and that they're the ones really paying attention most to this?
Yeah, especially on anything that's like very in the weeds on like the data usage or those types of things. The ones where we're definitely keeping a much closer eye on is anything that involves the actual direct communication with the customer. So keeping an eye on ones that need to start disclosing on like those Facebook posts that there was AI involved, on the or those social media posts or those emails that there was AI involved in that content generation, being compliant in that where states, have that, especially going forward in the future where they might have something like that. The other place where, once again, just kind of that gray area and unknown is that we've strayed away from doing much with image generation because of those
Yeah.
disclosure laws and or the potential for a lot of those to start coming out soon, and instead relied more on actual content that our customers have generated in the past and then strategically reusing that and then introducing new content into the funnel that they provide us manually. So I would say that right now our aside from just paying attention and being compliant where we need to be, it's more so not over committing to something where we think in the future there could be a lot of regulation or could be a real chilling effect on that avenue, and instead making those bets in areas where we feel pretty safe that it's going to be something that's going to be allowed and very commonly used for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, that's super fascinating to hear how even the perception of an area being the future subject of regulation, if you're trying to map out what are the most strategic opportunities for my startup to grow, even those vibes of, oh, image generation seems a little sketchy. If you're just a small firm in Nebraska oh, let's lean into image generation now, obviously would raise a lot of business considerations. So we may never see those laws, but even now you're changing your business practices.
Yeah, or at least just it's a weighting in the priority. It's not the sole weight that we're using in that, but if we're looking at, should we build feature A or feature B, some of those, that involve AI, there is a non-zero amount of, okay, well, what's the regulation landscape going to look like in 3 years or 10 years? And are we building something where maybe it'll be powerful and give us a competitive advantage, but come 2030, we're going to be screwed because all of a sudden we're not able to do that, or we're not able to provide it in a way that our customers are happy with because of different things that need to be built in the process. And then we're back to square zero. And instead, take the little bit slower, maybe a little bit safer path of maybe not be as killer of a feature or quite as, you know, magical feeling, but it's something that we feel confident is going to be just as useful in 2030 as it is in 2025.
Yeah, and no one ever wants to go back to square zero. I mean, at least square
No,
one is nice to
Yeah.
go
right.
back to. But
Yeah, we,
Thomas,
we started pre-COVID, so we've already done it once of having to go back to square zero. We don't want to do it a second time.
yeah, although I would if I had funds to invest, I would love to invest in a firm called Square Zero because that sounds pretty fun. If anyone starts that firm, please do send me an email and I will send you minimal amount of money. So Thomas, you're in New York. Unlike Nebraska, New York is commonly mentioned among the states that's maybe a little bit more proactive on tech regulation. And you are very much in a space that is highly regulated, that there are a lot of eyeballs on. Uh, how do you wake up in the morning and just think about some of these policy dilemmas, and what laws at the federal or state level are kind of top of mind for you?
Yeah. Great question. So I think that the first thing I want to mention is just like I agree with Andrew, sort of the perception of risk can change business practices in a pretty significant manner right now, particularly as startups are being forced into talking about privacy and security and thinking about vetting third-party providers, oftentimes with very sensible data privacy and security regulations and guidelines such as SOC 2 and ISO as well, right? And so we are responsible for all of our third-party providers being secure and being reputable for all the firms that we work with. In terms of New York and in terms of national regulations, I've been very familiar in watching the RAISE Act as it comes through as it was passed by the New York House and is now on Hudgel's desk.
So the RAISE Act made it through the New York legislature, sitting on the governor's desk. She has until the end of the year to say yes or no.
Yes or no?
Tell us a little bit more about the RAISE Act. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but for listeners who perhaps missed an episode, which I just can't believe they would, but for anyone who has, tell us about the RAISE Act.
Yeah, so the RAISE Act is led by Alex Borez, who is currently a state assemblyman in New York. He's also running for Jerry Nadler's seat in the Upper West Side, very interestingly. And his act basically regulates any model that is from a company that has raised more than $100 million there, right? And it regulates both of liability on that side, as well as other sort of restrictions there as well. And what's interesting about it is that I think that it's actually a really well thought out bill, right? And I think that it definitely pins down, I think, some of where the risk comes from, right? I do think that the unfortunate aspect is it only applies in New York, right? And since it's a New York law, right? And it could have the unintended effect of affecting startups in New York that are using foundation models. Because these frontier labs, knowing the risk of having a model deployed in New York, could geofence any model from New York, and so you could not use it from a New York jurisdiction there. Yeah.
Assemblymember Borez is definitely one of the more thoughtful thinkers in this space about how to strategically go about mitigating some of these concerns. And he's said elsewhere that, having a federal approach might be a preferable approach to some of these systemic risks and existential risks that folks talk about. And yet we're moving forward with this bill that is intended to definitely preserve the space of startups like yourself. So how real of a concern do you have about that geofencing possibility of firms like OpenAI actually saying, hey, we're not going to deploy our model, our ChatGPT 5 or 6, whenever that comes out, in New York because this is too onerous or too vague?
Yeah, unfortunately, we rely upon the latest models that come out of these labs, right? So when new versions of GPT-5 come out, when Gemini 3 comes out, when Sonnet 5 comes out from Anthropic, right? We need to have access to these models because if we do not have access, companies based in California, companies based in China, companies based in any other foreign country will have access to these models, right? So we will be at a competitive disadvantage if geofencing does play out. And I think we've seen how geofencing affects our product so far. So for instance, we have clients in Australia who can only use models that are physically deployed in Australia, right? And we have customers in India who can only use models that are physically deployed in India. And what that means is that if there are data centers from AWS, from Google, or from Amazon, or from Azure, Microsoft, that do not support certain foundation models, which oftentimes they don't, and oftentimes in foreign countries are the last places to receive these models. If we do not have access to that, that radically puts our system at a disadvantage here, right? Compared to other systems like Harvey or like OpenAI, ChatGPT there, right? And so I think that by this geofencing gives us a utter disenfranchisement, right, of lawyers who use our product and what type of ROI they can see.
And Thomas, you all are growing, you are reaching into new countries. I'm curious if there are other startups in New York who share your concern. Are you just alone thinking these thoughts, or have you identified other people who share similar concerns about this geofencing possibility?
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of startups here in New York, right? There's this whole thing called the Startup Alley, which is like Broadway between like Union Square to Penn Station, right? Through Nomad and Flatiron. That's become Startup Alley, and a lot of startups are located here, right? Very high growth startups just like us that are maybe going from 0 to 100 million in revenue, in the span of a couple of years, right? So this is where a lot of job growth is happening in New York, right? We are hiring very quickly, same with every other startup located here. And so I think that, yes, we, along with many other startups here, share this concern that it will impact the pace of growth overall for startups located here. And it will affect our customers, right? Our customers are oftentimes New York-based law firms that have a drastic economic need for this type of technology, right? They're seeing bigger law firms, maybe international law firms, start to use this technology, and they want to be able to do the same sorts of things that these larger law firms would do, right? And so it feels like an economic engine from their end as well.
Yeah, and for listeners who are thinking, would we ever see a AI lab not deploy a model in a jurisdiction because of some onerous regulation or regulation they're not satisfied with? We've already seen this play out in the EU, where a number of AI companies have opted not to deploy their tools, at least not right away or
Not
in
as
as
fast.
robust a format because of EU regulations. So I do think I've yet to hear of any major labs saying that if Hochul signs the RAISE Act, they will not deploy there. But we have seen this occur elsewhere, and I think it's telling from your vantage point and from the vantage point of all of your colleagues on Startup Alley, which is a fun name that I'm going to use all the time now. It sounds like this is something that is top of mind. And that alone, as we've talked about, that perception of a possibility does have a real chilling effect. So, Andrew, again, Nebraska isn't known as the epicenter of AI policy, but to what extent are you engaging with lawmakers who feel some sort of need to respond to this moment? How are they engaging with you? What are you trying to share with legislators who may feel a kind of compulsion to get into the AI game?
So, as always, right? It's a relationship game. So each senator has different things that they care about. Nebraska is also very unique that we have a unicameral with only a single, combined House and Senate. So in some aspects, it makes things easier. In some aspects, it makes it much harder. But for them, really highlighting, what are the things that they care about, broadly boiling down to how is this beneficial to growing the Nebraska economy, to creating that job growth, especially creating those future-facing high-tech jobs, the ones that will help with brain drain, if that's a big issue here in Nebraska, as it is in a lot of states that aren't, New York, California, Illinois, Florida, that have the net migration, especially of college grads, where Nebraska being able to paint the picture of saying if we, you know, really tie our hands behind our back here by having onerous regulations or, well-intentioned but misguided regulations that cause real impacts on businesses like ours, then it's just going to set ourselves behind. And to Thomas's point, it's not just the tech startups like us they're going to be hurting, but it's actually any Nebraska-based business that now all of a sudden finds itself at a massive disadvantage versus its national peers. Maybe it's fine for someone that, is only able to provide a physical service. It's not going to impact that much because they're just competing with the guy down the street anyways. But for those law firms, for those marketing agencies, for, any e-commerce company, anybody that's competing in the nationwide marketplace, they're just going to be setting ourselves behind. And unfortunately, we've already seen that almost happen completely unintentionally, where there's a child safety bill that passed this year in the state legislature, and there was just a single throwaway sentence that said you cannot provide AI for any logged in user. Didn't matter what age, didn't matter if you're a child or not, no opt-in, no nothing. It was just flat out banned. And I mean, seeing that, basically at Cold Sweats, where it's like, well, I guess it's time to look into what it's going to cost to relocate to Iowa because just flat out that would be a company killing moment right there. Not only could we not build AI into our platform, which talking with investors nowadays, it's no longer exciting or interesting if you go and pitch them as an AI company because just all software is AI at some fundamental level. But also we couldn't use AI to be able to keep up with our better funded peers across the country that are also using AI on top of already having more resources or more employees. And so it was really just kind of a double-edged sword there. It was just pretty much a non-starter. Thankfully, that got removed from the bill. The bill passed with quite a few other amendments and things to put it in a much better place after considerable public engagement from a lot of folks in the state. But I think that just highlights the example where someone has good intentions of trying to go out there and protect those that need protection, right? That's the role of regulation, that's the role of government. But by not understanding exactly what the sentence means, or not understanding the requirements of having it be located in, certain geography or have certain restrictions for that area, how that unintentionally could set that state or that city back by having those regulations. I very much think that we need to have that federal standard to prevent those types of edge cases and those types of there's a lot of good from having the marketplace approach of having 50 different experiments running simultaneously, right? So we can see what's good and what's bad. But this is a clear case where interstate commerce is such a big concern that it just really feels like it's more of a federal issue. But the states are taking the baton while the federal path is going a little bit slower right now.
Yeah, we are in day 41, I think, fingers crossed, of the last day of the shutdown. So we will see if Congress has an opportunity to step into this AI void soon. But Andrew, it's telling to hear you say it's very much on the table to consider moving to Iowa, for example, or moving to another state for someone where it is a question of, are we going to be able to operate or not? This is really where we can see the need to vote with your feet, so to speak, so that you can do work with your hands, right? And this is fascinating also to hear about how something you and I talked about earlier, which is there's a sense among the heartland, for lack of a better phrase, that AI can be the new engine of opportunity and startups and innovation. Can you speak briefly to what perhaps folks on the coasts aren't appreciating about all the good activity that's going on in the AI space in and around Nebraska?
Yeah, so we have a couple natural advantages specifically in Nebraska of a strong data center backbone and a strong just like infrastructure layer with like level 3 communications and a lot of the fiber optics with like Offutt back when it was Stratcom and everything else that really sets Nebraska specifically up to succeed very well in something where you need a lot of data, you need a lot of electricity, you need a lot of throughput, need a very safe environment, from like earthquakes, any other sorts of risks where geographically speaking, very well set up to take advantage of that. And also, I think more from a philosophical standpoint, it gives us the opportunity to skip ahead. There's no guarantees that that will happen, but if we can, it really levels the playing field versus the coast and versus New York or San Francisco, where all of the rules are being rewritten of, not only who are going to be the companies that dominate in the AI age, but then also with the tools that AI gives you, even if you're not fully AI first as a company or a product right now, if you're able to incorporate AI today to be that much more efficient, and we had talked about this earlier, Kevin, but upskill our employees where we now all of a sudden have folks who are doing sales or customer success or helping with like marketing that they're able to actually like create things that live as product or create micro apps with Replit or with Cursor, or they're able to build out AI workflows that before we would have needed to you know, frankly, just wouldn't have been able to take advantage of those workflows manually or be able to take advantage of it in our internal processes, and just was capabilities we couldn't deliver to our customers without AI. That just having that mentality of how we can bake it in first and have that first mover advantage, I think has a lot of people really excited across the Midwest in a way that we didn't see with like crypto or some of the other technologies where there's a lot of, just kind of good old fashioned uh, somewhere between stubbornness and also just hesitancy on what was happening in the markets. I think from talking with my colleagues and peers and mentors, it seems like everyone's pretty whole hog in on AI and the benefits that it can bring for their businesses.
Yeah, and it's great to hear your summation of the various factors that add up to what makes an AI hub, right? Having that talent, having that power, having that quality relationship with your state legislators. All of that is really influential, and the mix of that can change over time, which is great from a competitive pressure standpoint. But Thomas, when you're talking with folks like Assemblymember Borres or anyone who is involved in these AI conversations, and we're not going to name names here, so just in generic conversations you've had or things you've heard from others on Silicon Alley, what are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions that you would just like to correct in terms of what would it take actually to help a company like August? What would be if you woke up tomorrow a welcomed headline of, oh, yes,
Right.
finally, the state legislator did this or Congress did that, what would you love to read in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean, I graduated from Columbia as an undergrad there. I've been reaching out and working with a couple of professors there recently, and about how to get our agents to be the most safe for law and for law firms there, right? So this means a lot of like prompt things as well. So um, making sure that our users don't hack our prompts and don't prompt inject. But it also means making sure our agents aren't emailing confidential information around to other entities there, right? And I think the biggest misconception in that is sort of like, I think we as a company are very determined to make the safest AI possible, right? And things that are as good and as helpful to our law firms and our users as possible there. And I think that means a lot of research that needs to be done from the highest level, from the US government perspective, from universities, and from companies just like ours, right? There's a whole swath of research and opportunities that I think have yet to be explored there, and collaborations across different industries. So there's a couple of labs at Columbia that we are sponsoring events, helping out with some research, working with some postdocs there, right? And I think that I would love to see more expansive collaboration there on the research side. On the specific policy side, I think that you could imagine more public disclosure requirements, right, for foundation models. I know that there are already a couple of potential opportunities for this nationwide, right? And I think that that's something that I think we would recommend and we would be interested in, particularly domain-specific disclosure requirements, especially in law, right? So what is the potential for a particular foundation model to hallucinate some particular laws, right? You could imagine societal benefits to this nationwide, right? If your models are accidentally hallucinating some type of law there, right? That's one thing that I would highly recommend, as well as more investment in the research side, right? On the university and on the national level there, right? I think that's something that would definitely help us out, as we are already collaborating with entities for this. And I think that's something that I would highly recommend people do, particularly as foundation models and their applications are ever expanding, right? Just the sheer speed of iteration right now is spectacular, right? You are seeing things that a year ago no one could imagine being done today, right? And I think that we are sort of at the forefront there of seeing how these models interact with people, how they are able to do actual legal work, right? And how they can really speed up a lot of work that people thought might not have been possible even a year ago.
Yeah, it's great to hear that point emphasized of any business worth their salt wants to release the safest product possible, because the
Exactly.
last thing you want, if you're a car manufacturer, you don't want a car that drives off the road. You're not going to get very many customers if your car just serially only turns left, for example. And in your context, Thomas, getting a legal answer wrong or having
It's
too many
incredibly
hallucinations, no one's going to want to buy that. And so that accuracy determination makes a heck of a lot of sense. And it's so interesting to hear, what are the sorts of disclosures that would be helpful for you all to then be able to go and say to your customers, hey, no, we've heard from OpenAI, we've heard from Meta, we've heard from whomever about these assurances. They've been vetted, they've been clearly identified. That fosters innovation on your side. That's really interesting to hear about.
yeah.
And Andrew, from your vantage point, what would you love to wake up to? Or if you could wave a wand and disappear any sort of misconception, what would that be?
I think the big misconception would be that it necessarily is guaranteed to be a job destroyer. I think, especially right now, this will probably age the podcast a little bit, but just with October being a very layoff heavy month, right, and seeing some very high ones with a lot of, I would say probably just whitewashing about it being because of AI and not other factors that led to those decisions by those companies, that there's a lot of fear, that there's just a lot of FUD out there about AI and how it's just guaranteed to come after all of our jobs. And, there's probably some world where that's what actually happens, right? Continue to see that capital versus labor is a struggle that's tougher and tougher for labor every year. But overall, from how we've seen it internally being used and how we've seen our peers being have been able to use it, of we're able to go out there and actually do more with our current employees, be able to grow our revenue, and also through that eventually be able to hire more employees and frankly be able to pay them more because they're doing, all of them are able to do more value added work than they were able to do before, able to generate more revenue per employee than they were able to do before. And so it feels to be like looking back at those old rooms that we see in literally black and white photos of the New York Stock Exchange, or the ad agencies in New York in the 1930s, where you had a whole floor of secretaries that were sitting there on typewriters typing up different letters by hand, and you had in engineering you had whole rooms of people that were just put in punch cards to machines to run the calculations, all of which you can do in Microsoft Word by yourself or Microsoft Excel by yourself. And saying when the personal computer was coming out and software was coming out, hey, we need to get rid of this because all those jobs are at risk. And it's like, yes, it might hurt the person that's putting in the punch card. It might hurt the person that's sitting there on the typewriter. But now that person can go on and be a doctor, or they can go on and be a salesperson. They can go on and be a developer or a data scientist or whatever else that's, a higher value add for the economy overall, higher value add for the business. And then ultimately for that person also just pays them a better wage. Now, you know, there will probably be, as we go through that transition, there will be pain, there will be economic issues that come out of it. But I think just eliminating that misconception that it's guaranteed that AI is coming for every single one of our jobs and there's no benefits for the actual employees of the AI companies or employees from using AI tools, I think is something that definitely needs to go away.
Yeah, and I'm someone who tends to scour the New York Times archives because I find them fascinating. And I've yet to come across an article where someone was bemoaning the loss of the horse pooper scooper.
That
But
too, yeah.
perhaps I'm not looking hard enough. But I do think we've been here before in terms of that productive churn of seeing reallocation of skills to jobs that, in theory, are less labor intensive, right? More fulfilling, and more likely to give people kind of that quality of work and quality of life they're looking for. Now, to your point, Andrew, none of that's necessarily guaranteed for worker A or worker B, but how do we take that aggregate picture is really interesting.
Yeah.
So
And another quick example of from, because Creighton's a big, where I went to school, big medical school. And so I have various friends that are doctors, nurses, things like that. And hearing even in like the medical field, how they're using AI and how it's freeing up a lot of that busy work, freeing up a lot of those things to actually allow more of that human touch moment. Because instead of the doctor or the nurse being so obsessed with covering every little thing and then remembering that from memory and having to spend 30 minutes typing that all out, that they're able to record that, it's able to synthesize it and put it that all into the notes, very with no hallucinations. Obviously their standard has to be very high for those types of things, but just that it allows the doctor to be more present in that moment where they can actually just like focus on that human to human conversation. That I think we're going to feel and see a lot more of those stories and impacts come out of that, where it's not even necessarily about the jobs that are able to be productively churned, but more so eliminating that busy work that we're all subject to so that we can have and focus more on that human to human moment.
yeah, no, that makes tons of sense. And it's a great illustration of the fact that there's so many tasks we don't pay attention to that we don't realize are inhibiting higher quality of service and just better service. So, Thomas, if you were to walk into a room full of aspiring AI founders, or if you were advising Thomas 11 months ago on the precipice of starting this exciting venture, what advice would you have from a regulatory standpoint? Would you still find yourself based in New York? If you could redo it all, would you join Andrew in Nebraska? What factors would you take into mind?
So, I mean, just shortly, I want to touch on the previous point, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in Alaska, and I went back home a couple of months ago, and I sort of saw exactly what Andrew is referring to here, right? Sort of that ability for AI to really make a difference, not just on the coasts, but elsewhere and in more rural places there, right? And I think that's a real democratizing force. And I think that's something that's very underrated, right?
And what did you see in the Arctic hinterlands?
Yeah.
What was a great example for
A
you?
ton of my friends are working in Alaska, doing outdoor stuff, working on oil fields, doing film, doing art, right? All of these things. And all of them are using AI in some capacity there, right? Whether that means to code, whether that looks like to edit videos, right? I think that even in creative fields, it's sort of empowered artists outside of the coasts to really transform their work and to really enable more creative elements to appear there, right? And so I think that these are all things that sort of might not have been possible even a year ago, right? And are empowering people who might not have had the first access to the internet, right? I mean, we got internet access at our home back in like 2012 or something, so we were pretty late there, right, compared to the rest of the US. And so I think that there's many ways in which this next couple of years could equalize some digital divide attributes there, right? And I think that's one thing that could be very impressive there.
And this is just such an important point, though, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because folks aren't appreciating the fact that in a lot of places, if you have ready access to a lawyer, if your primary care physician is 5 miles away rather than 50 miles away, if you have a bunch of professionals in your community, then sure, maybe you are opposed to AI being a therapist or AI being a lawyer and so on and so forth. But having lived in Montana and hearing from folks who've lived in Alaska, it can be a total game changer. And sharing those stories is so important because AI doesn't have to be better than humans in every single context. It's better than who is the next best up human that we really need to be talking about. And that's just a great example to hear.
And you have towns in Alaska that have a one-room schoolhouse, right? That could have just a village safety officer, not a police officer there, right? So there are many circumstances where asking ChatGPT might be better than some of the alternatives, for instance, right? And I think that's something that's totally not present in the current like front cover of the New York Times, for instance, there right now.
The New York Times could do a heck of a lot better job of covering the rest of America besides Mandani and whatever's happening in San Francisco and New York. So I'm not sure we'll see those headlines as much as I wish they would show up. But Thomas, for your own,
yes, back to your actual question. Yeah.
Tell us your advice. Looking back at other founders, how should they get started? What should they think about?
Yeah, so I think that the models and companies are moving so fast now, right? You are seeing companies that my parents might not know of, right? That every engineer uses. So Cursor has gone from 0 to 500 million in revenue overnight, right? It's allowed us as a team of 6 engineers to build code faster than a team of 100 or 1,000 engineers at larger companies, right? It's an equalizing force in that sense. It allows small companies like ours to build software at a speed that's profoundly different. We can merge in 10,000 line PRs or 10,000 line commits that would take a team of like 10 engineers maybe a week to perfect. We can do that in a couple of hours with our small team size. And I think that allows for product level capabilities to drastically speed up and accelerate, right? And so that's what you see at our company. And I think that if I were to tell myself a year ago, I would say that you really should care about product velocity early on, right? Get that sort of product momentum out and not think too heavily on where in what specific value pieces that trajectory lies, right? So think a lot about like how you get that product velocity, how you work on building out a sort of scalable engineering team structure there, right? And that on the regulatory side, I would say that means being very willing to adopt the latest models and being able to adopt the latest infrastructure and doing whatever it takes to get access to those models, right? Whether that means moving to a different country, whether that means deploying models in the US or deploying models overseas there, right? So we've had many options where we have model constraints in some countries there, right? And we've worked with AWS, Azure, and Google to try to deploy those models even faster in those circumstances so that we ourselves can get that productivity increase and our customers can get that productivity increase there.
Well, I know I've sapped enough of your productivity over the span of this podcast. I'm profoundly thankful to the two of you for joining. So thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Thomas. We'll have to leave it there.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.